Well, let's unpack the story further with University of Johannesburg international law expert, Professor Hennie Strydom. Professor Strydom, good evening to you. Thanks for your time tonight. You can hear the President there choosing his words very carefully, I think rightfully so. Difficult to describe anybody who's describing this trip as a resounding success.
Yeah, indeed. Good evening to everybody. I also find it a bit surprising because it's early days and much will still have to happen for the war to end as a first step. So I think the encouraging aspect is that the delegation made it to Ukraine and Russia and had the opportunity to speak to both leaders. And secondly, to put across their proposals or their worries and ideas about what should happen. And I'm extremely happy to hear that the South African president has strongly confirmed the sovereignty issue under the United Nations Charter. And we will see how the further engagement with the leaders will develop and evolve over time. But I think the first important step, of course, is to bring an end to hostilities.
When one listens to what the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said post the visit and Vladimir Putin yesterday, it's very clear that the matters that are on the agenda, at least top of the list for both countries, are incredibly polarized. How then do we gauge the success of an effort such as this?
Indeed, at the beginning of any kind of engagement or intervention of this kind, the parties will address the issues from totally opposite views, and it will be polarized. And that is the whole idea of having a sort of mission of this kind, generally, is to bring the parties closer to a point of consensus. But it's a difficult and it could be a very long path to reach that point of consensus. And that is the aspect of this whole mission we will have to closely watch to see how the interventions made by the African delegation will be able or not able to bring the parties to that point of consensus.
Professor Strydom, there are many who have seen this entire effort as completely laughable, a waste of time, saying that these leaders were better off at least trying to intervene on some of the conflicts, problems that we have on the continent than going all the way to Ukraine and to Russia. Your particular views on that and the positioning that you believe these countries have in actually even making and taking the steps over this effort?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's some merit in the concerns about having a delegation of this kind going, across many other countries and leaving Africa to solve conflicts or a conflict in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, while we have quite a large number of unsolved conflicts on the African continent for many, many years now, without any end in sight, if I can say that. And I think there's merit in the view to say that these African leaders should rather spend their time and energy on solving conflicts in Africa. But I think it's also true to say that let them try. This war between Ukraine and Russia must come to an end. And I think the merit in this specific intervention by the African countries has to do with the impact of the war on Africa, especially as far as food products are concerned. And it is general knowledge that Africa is hard hit in this regard, and that in many instances African states will find it very difficult to deal with the impact of this as far as food is concerned. And from that perspective, there may be a bit of success that the African delegation could achieve in bringing the African view across to the warring factions in that conflict.
It seems to me like part of the lower hanging fruit, and as far as the economic impact, because they're very clear steps that could be taken, as in tomorrow, that could ease matters around trade and imports of that we're talking about, grain, sunflower oil. The fact that we come out of this weekend not having that, does it give you confidence that these conversations will continue?
Yes, I'm confident that will continue, and I think you're quite right about the low-hanging fruit. If that could be eased in itself, it will serve some purpose. And I think maybe that is one of the objectives that the African delegation is hoping to achieve with their visit to Ukraine and Russia. And I think for the peoples of Africa and many of the countries, that will be a positive sign.
Professor Strydom, this trip has been marred by the controversy that unfolded in Poland. The President's security detail, around 100 of them stuck on the tarmac with journalists and SAA crew. How do you analyze what we saw happen in Warsaw over the period of around 2 days, really, when it comes to these difficulties that were experienced?
I think one of the issues that we are faced with is the lack of proper information about what was the justification for the conduct of the Polish authorities in detaining parts of the crew and making it difficult for them to proceed with what they needed to do. There was a bit of information a day or two ago to the effect that came from the Polish authorities, saying that South Africa has not given a full and complete inventory regarding the people on that ship and equipment, etc. If that is indeed the reason and the only reason, one could have some sympathy with the intervention or interventions taken by the Polish authorities. But much of this is still uncertain, so I hope that there will be better information and more correct and more complete information in the course of time. But I think generally what I, and maybe other people as well, would say is that it's very unfortunate that this happened. And for that reason, I think it's also important that we get a complete picture of what the reason for that was, and whether there was indeed a failure on the part of the South African or African authorities to provide a complete inventory.
The Sunday Times today is speaking based on information that it says is from Polish officials who spoke on condition of anonymity, say part of why there was this difficulty is because the Polish government holds a view that South Africa should free Janusz Walus and that he should be repatriated back to his home country. In your experience, your understanding of international law, international matters, would such a grievance result in the kind of diplomatic disaster that this could well turn out to be?
I don't think that the Janusz Walus issue is enough reason for that kind of conduct by a state having to deal with a foreign delegation involving several heads of state. I'm a bit sort of hesitant to give some credence to that view in this matter.
All right. The elephant in the room is still very much about what happens in August, because the president has not said much about his engagement with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, as to whether or not he will come to the BRICS summit. We know that there are a number of scenarios that his party, the ANC, has been canvassing around how to proceed, given the ICC and the arrest warrant. What do you think is going to likely happen in that regard?
Yeah, I think the August event, the BRICS summit, and the whole issue about the warrant of arrest for President Putin is a more credible reason for the events that unfold. And I think that, as I understand current negotiations or discussions and thinking about the matter, that the South African government is still trying to find a solution to this, because, as you will recall, that committee, parliamentary committee, was appointed to determine South Africa's obligations in this regard. Stated that there is an obligation in terms of South African law to arrest President Putin. So, as I understand the matter now, there is still a sort of attempt made to see how South Africa can get around that. I think there's another issue that we must not forget, and that's the Lady R matter that is still shrouded in secrecy. And the matter in itself was not well handled by the South African government. The fact that there's a commission of inquiry appointed without South Africans having the opportunity to know the outcome of, according to President Ramaphosa, because it will not be made known, is itself worrisome. So it may be, I'm also not 100% certain about it, but it may be that the issue about weapons loaded on that ship and that it was destined for Russia is also maybe a matter that could have played a role. But we are speculating on all of these, and until we have better and more complete information, we will be sort of in the dark about the actual reasons for the conduct of the Polish authorities.
All right. Well, unfortunately, the vacuum of information, of course, lends itself to speculation, given the different information that's also coming out from the various sides affected by the story. Thanks for your time tonight, Professor Hennie Strydom. He's with the University of Johannesburg. He's an international law expert.